After discussing the greatest common factor, which was the GCF, we go ahead and look at another idea that students get confused easily, and it's the idea of least common multiple. And so this idea of trying to distinguish between multiples and factors is what causes the confusion. So what is the least common multiple? We usually abbreviate this with LCM. The least common multiple of two or more whole numbers, non-zero of course, can equal to 0, is the smallest number, whole numbers, non-zero, that is a multiple of each of the numbers, the least common multiple. So before we can do that, we need to do multiples. So here's an example. Let's start with 6. So if 6 is our number, the multiples, right, that's different than factors. The multiples of 6 are 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36, and then going on in that pattern. So the multiples of 6 can be represented by 6 times n, where n is a whole number. And so that's what we're talking about in multiples. So a multiple is created from a multiplier. And so 6, 12. And then compare that to, let's say, let's pick another one. Let's go with 8. The multiples of 8 are going to be 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, dot, dot, dot. And so in this case, now we know what multiples are. If someone asks you, what's the least common multiple of 6 and 8? Least common. So I'm looking for the smallest common multiple. And so in this case, one way we could look at it is through, look at the list. This is the first one. So the LCM would be there. And so later on, when we talk about this, the LCM, the least common multiple, or the smallest common multiple, is also considered the least common denominator. And so students get this mixed up, but they're the same thing. Least common denominator, which we learn later in the fractions chapter. The least, or the lowest, right? The lowest common denominator. And so students get those mixed up, but they're actually the same thing. And so you can see it's 6th grade where students from the Common Core have to find the least common multiple of two whole numbers less than or equal to 12. And so we just did one here for 24. And then something to keep in mind with research, possibly because students often confuse factors and multiples, even you guys will. The greatest common factor and the least common multiple are difficult topics for students to grasp. It's not about they understand what they are, they just get the names mixed up. And so you should come up with your own way of thinking about how do I differentiate between factors and multiples. And so here is another example. And before we do the example, I want to remind you of the 2 ways we're looking at here to do this. One is through the intersection method, is exactly what we just did here, where you just list them and find out the intersection and look for the lowest or the least common multiple. And as the example done here, least common multiple of 24 and 36, you start building up a list, look for the intersection, and I see they intersect at 72, 144. And so in this case, though, these are common multiples, but 72 in this case, right? And 72 out of that list here, 72 is what we would call the least common multiple of 24 and 36. The LCM is equal to, the LCM of 24 and 36 is equal to 72. This is the lowest common or least common. 144 is a common multiple, but it's not the lowest. And the other way that I'll ask you to do it is through the prime factorization method. And so sometimes students like that because it's just easy to do. It's faster than listing things out. And so you can see if we take 24 and factorize it, that turns, I'm going to skip the work. So what that comes out to be is 2 cubed. Actually, let's write them all out. And so 24 24 becomes 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. 36, you can see over here, is this here, becomes 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. And so to calculate the least common multiple of this one here, of 24 and 36, which you already know it's 72, what you're looking for is, we're trying to not find the factors where we look at the common factor would be 6 in the old one, right? So the greatest, let me change colors here. So in the previous lesson, the greatest common factor of 24 and 36 would turn out to be, the GCF, the greatest common factor, would be, looking at the list here, again, we would have 6. And so looking at this again, it's not 6, it's the greatest common factor is 12 because of what they have in common. They have a 2, a 2, a 3, and so that's 2 times 2 is 4 times 3 is 12. So that's the greatest common factor. Now, for the least common multiple, that number is bigger. We already know it's 72 right here. So it's bigger than these two. It's going to be equal to or bigger to the least common multiple. In a factor, it's the smaller numbers, equal to or smaller than. And so in this case, we know we need a bigger value. And so one way to do that is to take a factor from each of them. Okay. So for example, the instructions are here where you can see the least common multiple would be, we look to see what the least common multiple is going to be. Let's see what factors they have in common. So they have a 2 and they have a 3. So we write the 2 and the 3. And then in this case, we look for which one has the most. And so there's 3 here. And so then this becomes here. And then which one has the most 3s? And that would be, this one has 2. So you square it there, and this becomes 8 times 9 is 72. So we're going to go ahead and practice that one more time here. And so how to do it using, everyone knows how to do it with the intersection method. So I'm going to use this one here. I'm going to use the greatest common. Let's use we want to use the prime factorization. So on this one here, 42 gets simplified 7 times 2 times 3. 24 is, we already did that, 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. So the least common multiple of 42 and 24, we look to see where they have write all the factors, the different factors. They have a 7, there's a 2, and then there's a 3. And then we look to see the powers. So I have the 2, so there's 3 here and 2 here. So I take the greatest one. There's 3, 1, 3, 1, 3 here. So that's a 1. And so in this case, the least common multiple is going to be a number bigger. It's going to be 7 times 8 times 3. So this would be 56 times 3. So that would be 150, 168. So the least common multiple. So we're looking for the multiple, the first multiple between those is 168. The lowest common multiple or the least common multiple is 168. And that's it.